Wait, hold on. You're telling me a barefoot girl just pulled something out of his ear? And suddenly he could hear? Lucas Grant, a billionaire who spent 10 years and millions of dollars trying to fix his deaf son, is standing there frozen. His hands are shaking. And here's the part that gets me. Oliver, his 10-year-old son who hasn't heard a single sound in 8 years, looks at this barefoot stranger and says something that will change everything. "Don't hurt her, Dad." Those 4 words. The first words his son has ever spoken. But to protect a girl from the street who did what no amount of money could ever buy. But here's what Lucas doesn't know yet. The doctors knew. They knew what was wrong the entire time. They kept his son sick. On purpose. For money. And when Lucas finds out the truth, when he realizes they turned his son into a profit machine, he's going to do something that rocks the entire system. But first, a barefoot girl has to teach a billionaire what it really means to listen. Let's go back. Back to where this story truly begins. Not with the miracle, but with the man who had everything and yet had nothing. The courtyard of Grant Industries. Picture this. Marble floors so polished they reflect the afternoon sun like mirrors. A fountain in the center, water cascading endlessly. Glass buildings that pierce the sky, monuments to a man's ambition. This is the kingdom of Lucas Grant. Lucas Grant, 52 years old, tech billionaire, self-made. The kind of man who walked into a room and people stepped aside. He built an empire from nothing. Every deal was a victory. Every acquisition a conquest. Money wasn't just what he had, it was who he was. But on this particular afternoon, Lucas Grant was about to learn the most painful lesson of his life. That money, for all its power, has one fatal weakness. It cannot buy a father back his son's voice. While Lucas moved through the courtyard with his phone pressed to his ear, closing deals worth millions, his 10-year-old son sat alone on a marble bench. Oliver. That was his name. Oliver had been deaf since he was 2 years old. 8 years of silence. 8 years of a world that made sound, but he existed in perfect, complete quiet. And the cruelest part? His father, the most powerful man in that courtyard, was a stranger to him. Not because they didn't love each other, but because love, when there's no communication, becomes a prison for both of them. Lucas would stand beside his son and speak. Oliver would watch his father's lips move, would try to read the shapes, but the connection was always breaking. Always incomplete. And so they lived in the same house, in the same world, but in completely different universes. Do you know what Lucas did? He did what every desperate, wealthy man does. He threw money at the problem. Experts. The best in the world. Doctors flown in from Europe, Asia, America. Machines that cost more than most people's homes. Surgeries. Tests. Procedures. Endless attempts to fix his son. Every time a new doctor would walk through the door, Lucas would feel it, that spark of hope. This time, he'd think. This time we'll find the answer. And every time the answer was the same. We've done everything we can, Mr. Grant. Your son is deaf. The prognosis is permanent. Years passed. Oliver grew. And with each passing year, Lucas grew colder. Not toward his son, but toward himself. He'd convinced himself that if he just tried harder, spent more, hired better experts, eventually love could be solved like a business problem. You identify the issue. You allocate resources. You find the solution. But Oliver wasn't a problem to be solved. He was a boy who needed his father to see him. And Lucas was too blinded by his own desperation to notice. Here's something people don't understand about wealth. It doesn't just give you things. It isolates you. It creates walls. Lucas had so much money that he could hire people to handle his pain. Doctors to handle his son's disability. Assistants to handle his life. So what happened? He stopped being present. He stopped trying to truly connect. Instead, he connected with his phone, his deals, his empire. And Oliver? Oliver learned to exist without his father. He'd sit on that bench every day, drawing with a stick on the marble, creating worlds that existed only in his own mind. They lived in a mansion with 1,000 rooms, and they had never been further apart. But here's where the story gets darker. Much darker. Lucas didn't know it yet, but the doctors he was paying? The specialists he was trusting? They had a vested interest in keeping Oliver deaf. Think about that for a moment. Let it sink in. Every surgery that didn't work. Every test that came back inconclusive. It was all part of a machine. A machine that turned Oliver's deafness into an endless stream of money. As long as Oliver was deaf, the appointments continued. The treatments continued. The invoices continued. Lucas would sign the checks without question. A billionaire so focused on fixing his son that he never asked the most important question. What if the people I'm paying don't actually want to fix him? His son wasn't sick. He was profitable. Comment right now. What would you do if you found out the system you trusted had been lying to you the whole time? And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Because this story gets much bigger. And then she appeared. Not with fanfare. Not with an announcement. She simply walked through the gates of Grant Industries like she belonged there, even though everything about her screamed that she didn't. Leah. That was her name. She was maybe 14, 15 years old. Her feet were bare against the marble floor, calloused, dirt-stained, the feet of someone who had walked 1,000 miles and had nowhere to go. Her clothes were threadbare. Not fashionable threadbare. Actually threadbare. The kind that comes from wearing the same shirt for weeks, the kind that shows you've known real hardship. In her hands she carried a tray of trinkets. Carved wooden animals. Wilted flowers wrapped in newspaper. The kinds of things street vendors sell to tourists, to people rushing by, people who give money without looking at the person selling it. Security noticed her immediately. They always did. Men in dark suits started moving toward her, their job to keep the courtyard clean, to keep out the people who didn't belong. This girl with her bare feet and her wilted flowers definitely didn't belong in the kingdom of Lucas Grant. But something stopped them. Maybe it was the way she moved. Confident. Like she knew something they didn't. Or maybe fate, real actual fate, decided that this was the moment. Because instead of being escorted out, Leah walked straight toward the bench. Straight toward Oliver. Oliver didn't notice her at first. He was lost in his own world the way deaf children often are. Drawing shapes on the marble with a stick, creating stories no one else could see. But then, her shadow fell across his drawing. And he looked up. Their eyes met. In his eyes, loneliness. The kind of loneliness that comes from 8 years of silence, of being seen but not understood. In hers, recognition. Like she saw not just a deaf boy but the boy. Like she saw his soul. And then Leah did something that no one in that courtyard had done in 8 years. She raised her hand and signed. Her fingers moved with grace and certainty. Hello. Oliver's face changed. Completely transformed. For the first time, maybe in his entire life, someone was speaking his language. Not trying to teach him theirs. Not forcing him to lip read or wear a hearing aid. But actually, genuinely speaking his language. Do you understand what that means? To be isolated, to exist in silence, and then suddenly someone appears who understands? Who doesn't try to fix you or change you but simply sees you. They signed back and forth. Oliver's fingers moving with a fluency that Lucas had never seen before. His son was alive in a way that money had never made him alive. But Leah wasn't smiling. She was studying him. Her eyes narrowed, focused, like a doctor examining a patient. Then Oliver winced. His small hand came up to his ear. And he signed something to Leah. It itches, he told her. Leah's expression changed. It was subtle but it was there. Like she suddenly understood something. Like a puzzle piece had clicked into place. She knelt down in front of Oliver, her bare knees touching the cold marble, and she looked at him with an intensity that was almost frightening. Hold still, she whispered. And she reached toward his ear. Lucas was still on his phone 20 feet away, still conducting business, still oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to shatter. The security guards had stopped approaching, confused by the scene unfolding before them. Oliver didn't pull away. He didn't cry out. He simply trusted her. A stranger. A barefoot girl he'd known for 30 seconds. He trusted her more than he'd ever trusted anyone in a white coat who promised him miracles. And what Leah pulled from his ear, what she discovered in that moment, would prove that sometimes the answer to our biggest problems isn't hiding in expensive hospitals. Sometimes it's right there, waiting to be found by someone who actually, truly cares. Subscribe right now if you haven't already. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds will change everything. Oliver didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He sat perfectly still on that marble bench, trusting this barefoot stranger more than he'd ever trusted anyone in a white coat. Leah's fingers were steady. Calloused from years of work, from selling trinkets on the street, from survival. But in that moment, they moved with the precision of a surgeon. Her eyes were locked on his ear, focused with an intensity that seemed to see beyond the surface. It's going to feel strange, she whispered. And even though Oliver couldn't hear her, he understood from her face. From the way her hands moved. From the gentleness in her eyes that said, I know this is scary but I'm not going to hurt you. Her finger, just one, slid carefully into his ear canal. Deeper. Deeper. Oliver's body tensed, but he didn't move. And then, she felt it. Something. Something that didn't belong there. With a careful, steady motion, Leia pulled. Out came something black. Something alive. Something writhing. A parasite. A creature that had burrowed deep into Oliver's ear canal 8 years ago, lodged so deep that every single doctor, every single specialist, every single expert that Lucas Grant had paid millions to consult, had somehow missed it. It was small. Barely visible. But it was there. It had been there the entire time. Oliver gasped. For the first time in 8 years, his ear was clear. And in that split second, before his brain could even process what was happening, a sound tore through the courtyard. A car horn. Blaring. Loud. Real. The most painful, beautiful, terrifying sound Oliver had ever experienced in his entire life. His hands flew to his ears. His whole body convulsed. Sound. Actual sound. Not something he'd read about in books or seen people react to. But sound. Hitting his eardrums for the first time in 8 years. It was overwhelming. It was everything. And then, Oliver opened his mouth. And he screamed. But it wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of existence. His own voice. The voice he didn't know he had. Hoarse from disuse. Uncertain. Wobbling like a newborn fawn's first steps. But real. He was hearing himself. For the first time in his life, Oliver Grant could hear his own voice. That's when Lucas turned around. He heard it. His son's voice. Not through a video call. Not through a hearing aid device. But real. Alive. Happening right in front of him. For a moment, just a moment, the billionaire, the mogul, the man who'd built an empire on logic and control, froze. His phone fell from his hand. It clattered on the marble floor. The deal he was closing, the millions of dollars on the line, suddenly didn't matter. His world, built on power and pride, cracked open. Shattered. Rebuilt itself in an instant. What is happening? What did that girl do? My son. My son is speaking. 8 years. 8 years I've waited to hear those words, and they're coming now? From a barefoot stranger in my own courtyard. Lucas's legs moved before his mind could catch up. He lunged forward, his instinct taking over. Not to embrace his son. But to protect him. To yank Oliver away from the girl who had somehow, impossibly, done what no expert, no machine, no amount of money could ever do. Get away from him. Lucas barked at Leia. His voice ricocheted through the air, sharp and merciless. Security. The guards, who had been frozen in confusion, suddenly sprang into action. They moved toward Leia with authority, ready to remove her from the premises. This barefoot girl had no right to be touching the Grant heir. But before the guards could reach her, Oliver spoke again. Don't hurt her, Dad. Hoarse. Broken. Uncertain. But undeniable. The first words his son had ever spoken. Not to his doctors. Not to his mother. But to protect a stranger. A girl who had shown him more compassion in one moment than the entire system had shown in 8 years. Lucas stopped. His hand, which had been reaching to push the guards forward, dropped. His jaw went slack. His face went pale. Because he understood in that single moment that the sound of his son's voice hitting him harder than any blow ever could. For 10 years he'd prayed for this moment. He'd spent millions chasing it. He'd built machines trying to capture it. And here it was, happening in the courtyard of his own company, and it wasn't because of him. It wasn't because of his money, his power, his empire. It was because a barefoot girl from the street had actually, genuinely cared. Dad, Oliver said again, testing the word, marveling at the sound of his own voice. Dad. 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 Each time he said it, it got louder. More confident. More alive. And with each repetition, Lucas felt something inside him breaking open. Not cracking. Breaking. The walls he'd built around his heart, the defenses he'd constructed to survive in the world of money and power, were collapsing. Lucas Grant, billionaire, innovator, man of reason, walked toward his son. Not quickly. Not with authority. But slowly. Like a man learning to walk for the first time. He knelt down in front of Oliver. And for the first time in 8 years, his son could hear him speak. Could hear the trembling in his voice. Could hear the tears that had no words. I'm sorry, Lucas whispered. I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have seen you. And Oliver, this boy who had lived in silence, who had been alone in a world of sound, reached up and touched his father's face. Because even after 8 years of silence, he understood the language of tears. Behind them, Leia stood quietly. Her hands were stained faintly with dried blood from what she had pulled from Oliver's ear. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply stood there, bearing witness to the moment she had created. If this story gave you chills, if you felt that in your soul, I need you to like this video right now. Don't just watch. Engage. Comment, I felt that. And subscribe because we're about to go into the darkest part of this story. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Oliver was rushed to the hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses, all wanting to understand what had just happened. The hospital was cold, sterile. White walls, blinking monitors, the endless beeping of machines designed to keep humans alive and well. Lucas sat outside the examination room, his hands trembling. Not from fear anymore. From something darker. From guilt. Because in that moment, as he watched doctors swarm around his son with clipboards and instruments, Lucas began to wonder, if a girl with no medical degree, no fancy equipment, no millions in funding could do this in 30 seconds, why couldn't the specialists he'd paid do it in 8 years? That question would soon have an answer. And it would destroy him. A doctor emerged from the examination room. Dr. Richardson, chief of audiology at the hospital. The man Lucas had consulted with dozens of times over the years. The man he'd trusted. The man he'd paid. Dr. Richardson's face was a mask of professionalism. But there was something else there too. Discomfort. Evasion. He clutched his clipboard like it was armor. Remarkable case, Mr. Grant, the doctor said, his voice smooth as silk, polished with corporate calm. The obstruction appears to have been removed. Temporary recovery is possible. Temporary. That word hung in the air like poison. Temporary? Lucas stood up, his entire body shaking with barely contained rage. A girl off the street did what you couldn't do in 8 years, and you're calling it temporary? Mr. Grant, the doctor said, adjusting his glasses, avoiding Lucas's gaze, we followed all protocols. All medical standards. These cases are often quite complex. Protocols? Lucas's voice cracked, echoing through the hospital corridor. You took my money. You promised miracles. You never even looked inside his ear. 8 years, doctor. 8 years. And you never even bothered to look. Behind Lucas, another figure stepped forward. Leia, the barefoot girl. She had followed them to the hospital, unable to leave Oliver, unable to abandon what she had started. Leia's voice cut through the sterile air like a knife. Simple. Honest. Devastating. They didn't look, she said, because they didn't care. They saw your name, Mr. Grant. They saw your money. They didn't see your son. Lucas turned toward her. His anger flickered, but behind it something shifted. Recognition. Truth. A truth so obvious, so simple, that it had been invisible to him the entire time. He had been so focused on throwing money at the problem, on hiring the best people, on building solutions, that he'd never stopped to ask if those people actually cared. If they were motivated to help or just motivated to help themselves. The chief doctor, a different one, someone with actual integrity, stepped forward. Dr. Amelia Chin. She had been reviewing Oliver's files all morning, and something didn't add up. Mr. Grant, she said, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of what she was about to say, there's something you need to see. She slid a folder across the table. A thick folder. Pages and pages of medical notes. Charts. Test results. All stamped. All signed. All official. Lucas opened it slowly, his fingers trembling as he turned each page. Diagnosis after diagnosis. All the same, irreversible deafness. All the same recommendation, continue treatment. Continue medication. Continue appointments. And then he reached the last page. His eyes stopped. They wouldn't move. They couldn't. Maintain diagnosis to preserve long-term funding. That was the final line. And below it, a signature. Dr. Richardson's signature. And a note, Grant account approved. They didn't just fail to help Oliver. They deliberately, systematically kept him sick. Because Oliver's sickness was profitable. Lucas felt the world tilt. The folder fell from his hands. The papers scattered across the hospital floor like confetti. But there was no celebration. Only devastation. His son wasn't sick because of fate. His son wasn't deaf because of bad luck. His son had been kept deaf. Deliberately. By the very people Lucas had trusted to heal him. You monsters, Lucas whispered, his voice breaking. His knees buckled. You absolute monsters. You took my money. You took my hope. You turned my son into a profit machine. Every appointment was money. Every failed treatment was money. Every invoice was another check I signed, another year of my son's life you stole. Lucas's fists clenched until his knuckles went white. He bent down. He picked up the folder. He held it in both hands. And he tore it apart. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the sterile room like thunder. Like justice. Like the sound of a man finally waking up. You sold my son's silence, he said quietly, his voice more dangerous in its softness than in any rage. You sold it for money. You sold it for your vacation homes and your country club memberships. You sold it for nothing. Leia stood silently in the corner of the room. Her hands were stained with dried blood from what she had pulled from Oliver's ear. Evidence of actual care. Actual effort. Actual humanity. She didn't need to speak. Her silence said more than any words could. She was the mirror. The reflection of what medicine should be. What healing should be. What a single act of compassion could accomplish. While these doctors in their white coats had profited from Oliver's pain, this barefoot girl had risked everything to help a stranger. Not for money. Not for recognition. But because she could. Because she saw. Because she cared. Lucas turned to Leia, and in his eyes was a man transformed. Not happy. Not healed. But awake. Finally, terribly, painfully awake. How did you know? Why did you care? Lucas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Leia stepped forward, her bare feet making no sound on the hospital floor. Because I actually saw him, she said softly. Everyone else looked at the money. I looked at the boy. And in that moment, Lucas Grant understood something that no amount of wealth could have ever taught him. The richest man in the room had just been outshined by the poorest. If this is making your blood boil right now, if you're thinking about how corrupt systems profit from human suffering, comment, justice, right now. Let me know you're angry. And share this video with someone who needs to understand that compassion is worth more than gold. Night fell over the hospital. The angry voices faded. The security had escorted Dr. Richardson away. The investigation had been set in motion. But none of that mattered to Lucas anymore. He sat beside Oliver's bed in the darkness. Just a dim light above the headboard, casting shadows across his son's sleeping face. The monitors beeped softly. The 4 dripped steadily. And Lucas sat there, completely still for the first time in his life. His hands trembled. Not from anger. From something much deeper. From the crushing weight of 8 years of absence. 8 years of being in the same house but in a different world. 8 years of mistakes that could never be undone. Oliver's eyes opened. He looked at his father in the darkness, and for a moment, neither of them moved. 8 years of silence had created a vocabulary between them that words couldn't touch. Oliver reached out slowly, his small hand finding his father's wrist. He began to trace the pulse there, the rhythm of his father's heartbeat. Testing it, feeling it, trying to understand his father's life force through touch, the way he had learned to understand the world without sound. You're safe, Lucas whispered, though his voice shook terribly. I promise I'll fix this. Oliver turned his head slightly, his eyes searching his father's face in the darkness. His small lips moved slowly, uncertainly, testing the words like a child learning to walk for the first time. Not your fault, he said. His voice was hoarse from disuse, the syllables wobbling like a newborn fawn's first steps. Lucas's throat closed. His eyes filled with tears. Because his 10-year-old son, the child he had neglected, the boy he had tried to fix with money instead of love, had just shown him more grace than he deserved. I'm sorry, Lucas whispered. I'm so sorry, Oliver. I should have been here. I should have seen you. Not the problem. Not the deaf child who needed fixing. You. Your heart. Your soul. I should have seen that. Oliver reached up with his other hand and touched his father's face. He felt the tears. And even without sound, even without words, he understood. He understood that his father was finally hearing him. 4 years, Lucas had convinced himself that throwing money at experts was love. That presence could be replaced by progress. That problems could be solved like business deals. But in the quiet of that hospital room, with his son's hand on his face, Lucas understood the cost of his blindness. And it wasn't just Oliver who had paid the price. It was him too. He had built an empire. He had accumulated wealth beyond measure. He had achieved everything the world told him to achieve. And yet, sitting here in this sterile room, holding his son's hand, Lucas Grant was the poorest man alive. Because he had wealth but no richness. Success but no significance. Power but no purpose. And while he had been busy building towers, he had forgotten the only thing that mattered, the small boy who needed his father. Behind them at the door to the hospital room stood Leia. She had been there all night. Waiting. Watching. Not intruding but present. Her hands were still stained faintly with dried blood from what she had pulled from Oliver's ear. Her bare feet were cold against the hospital floor. Her threadbare clothes hung on her small frame. And her eyes burned with a fierce compassion. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to move. Her very stillness was a mirror, and Lucas saw himself reflected in it. Not the powerful CEO. Not the billionaire innovator. But a father who had stopped seeing his own child. This girl, this barefoot stranger, had shown more love to Oliver in one day than Lucas had shown in 8 years. And she asked for nothing in return. No payment. No recognition. No gratitude. Just the knowledge that she had helped. Lucas turned toward her. "You," he said. "How did you even know? What made you look? Why did you care?" Leia stepped into the room. Her bare feet made no sound. She came to stand beside Oliver's bed and she spoke softly. "Because I actually saw him," she said. "Everyone else looked at the money, Mr. Grant. Your clothes. Your courtyard. Your power. I looked at the boy. I saw him sitting alone, drawing with a stick on marble. I saw him waiting for someone to notice him. And no one did." Lucas felt those words like daggers. Each one finding its mark. "I have a brother," Leia said, her voice steady but trembling slightly with emotion. "He went deaf from an infection when he was 6. We went to the clinic. They turned us away because we couldn't pay. He's been silent for 3 years now. Completely silent. And every day I think about what I would give to pull something from his ear and give him back his voice." Lucas suddenly understood. Leia's brother had been left to suffer because he was poor. Oliver had been kept in suffering because he was rich. Different systems. Same cruelty. Different reasons. Same result, silence. "I know what it feels like when the world decides your pain isn't profitable," she said. "I know what it feels like to be invisible. So when I saw Oliver sitting alone in that courtyard, I couldn't just walk away. I wouldn't." Lucas stared at this barefoot girl who had entered his life less than 24 hours ago and changed everything. "You're just a kid," he said, his voice filled with wonder and shame. "How do you talk like you've lived 100 years? She shrugged, her gaze steady and knowing. "Because on the streets, you hear everything no one else listens to," she said simply. "When you have nothing, you learn to pay attention to what matters. When you're invisible, you learn to see everyone else." The room fell silent except for the soft rhythm of Oliver's breathing and the endless beeping of monitors. And in that silence, Lucas Grant finally heard something he'd been deaf to his entire life, the voice of truth. He turned back to his son, brushing a hand through the boy's hair. "I've been deaf too," he murmured. "Not my ears. My heart. I've been completely deaf to what matters." And if you're watching this right now, ask yourself, what have you been deaf to? What matters that you've been ignoring? Comment below with your answer. Because sometimes we all need to be reminded that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. That night, as the city lights blinked through the hospital window like distant stars, Lucas made a promise. Not to his company board. Not to his shareholders. Not to the legacy he had spent his life building. He made a promise to the small boy sleeping beside him. Lucas knelt beside Oliver's bed, not as a billionaire but as a father. He placed his hand on his son's chest, feeling his heartbeat, feeling the life flowing through him. And he spoke softly, barely a whisper, but with the weight of complete conviction. "I'm going to tear down every system that profited from your pain," he said. "I'm going to tear it down brick by brick, layer by layer, until there's nothing left but truth. I'm going to stop paying for hope and start fighting for justice. Not for me. Not for my redemption. But for you. And for every other child out there who's been silenced by greed." And as he spoke, Lucas Grant, tech billionaire, empire builder, man of power, died. And a father was reborn. Leia stood in the doorway watching. She didn't smile. She didn't applaud. She simply nodded, as if she had always known this moment would come. As if she had seen it in his face the moment they met. By morning the rain had stopped, but the world outside the hospital felt heavier than ever. Like it was carrying the weight of every injustice, every broken system, every silenced voice. Lucas Grant walked beside Leia and Oliver through the sliding glass doors, the cold air biting his skin like guilt made visible. Oliver clung to his father's sleeve, his small hand trembling each time an ambulance siren echoed in the distance. Sound was new to him. Raw. Terrifying. The world that hearing people took for granted was overwhelming. Every noise felt like thunder. Every siren was a shock. But with each sound, Oliver grew a little braver. His father's hand never left him. Inside the car, silence took over again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. The silence of three people sitting together, each understanding something the world had never taught them. Lucas stared at his reflection in the tinted window. A man who had everything yet had failed at the one thing that mattered most. The suit was expensive. The car was luxury. But the man wearing it was hollow. Until now. Until a barefoot girl had filled the hollow spaces with purpose. When they returned to the Grant mansion, Oliver wouldn't leave Leia's side. He followed her into the kitchen, into the garden, even sat near her when she was too exhausted to speak. He didn't follow his father with the same certainty. There was still a gap there. 8 years of silence creates a canyon that can't be crossed in a single day. But he followed Leia. Because she had been the first to see him. The first to care. Leia didn't treat him like a patient or a miracle. She just treated him like a boy who was finally alive. She made him soup. She sat with him when the sounds of the world became too much. She signed with him even as he learned to hear. She existed in both his worlds, the world of silence he was leaving and the world of sound he was entering. Lucas watched them from the hallway, feeling both admiration and shame twist inside him. This was what love looked like. Not expensive. Not complicated. Just present. Just genuine. Just real. That evening, as the house dimmed into soft amber light, Lucas found Leia standing by the window, gazing at the skyline. The city that had made him rich. The city that had also made him blind. "Why did you help him?" he asked quietly. "You didn't even know us. You risked everything. You could have gotten in trouble with security. You could have been arrested. Why?" Leia's voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Because no one helped my brother," she said simply. "He went deaf from an infection. The clinic turned us away because we couldn't pay. He's been silent for 3 years now. Completely silent. And every day I think about what I would give to pull something from his ear and give him back his voice." She paused, and Lucas felt the weight of her sacrifice. She had given to Oliver what she couldn't give to her own brother. "I know what it feels like when the world decides your pain isn't profitable," she continued. "I know what it feels like to scream into the void and hear nothing back. So when I saw Oliver sitting alone in that courtyard, I couldn't just walk away. I wouldn't." Lucas swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "Then help me make this right," he said. "Not with money. With truth. Find the places where the system is broken. Tell me where people are suffering because no one cares enough to look. Help me see what I've been blind to." She turned toward him, her face softening. "Start by listening to him," she whispered, pointing toward Oliver's room. "Really listening. Not fixing. Not planning. Just listening." That night, Lucas knelt beside his son's bed, where Oliver lay wide awake, tracing shapes in the air, his hands dancing with the freedom of someone who had finally found their voice. "What do you hear?" Lucas asked gently. Oliver smiled faintly, his voice trembling but sure. "Everything," he said. "I hear birds. Cars. When you breathing. Everything." Lucas's chest tightened. He leaned down and pulled his son close. "Then you'll never have to hear silence again," he whispered. "Not while I'm still breathing. Not while I still have power. Not ever again." Outside the window, the wind stirred through the city streets. And Leia stepped into the night, her silhouette fading into the dark like a prayer carried by the air. Lucas watched her go, realizing that the girl who had nothing had given him the only thing that mattered, a reason to finally listen, to finally fight, to finally live like a man who could hear. If this moment moved you, if you understand what it means to finally wake up to what matters, like this video now, comment, "I hear you," and subscribe because we're about to see Lucas Grant use his power for something that actually matters. Days later, the story had already spread. Headlines called it the miracle at Grant Industries. News outlets were fascinated. The internet exploded. A billionaire's deaf son hearing again. The heartwarming story everyone needed. But for Lucas, there was nothing miraculous about it. Only revelation. Only anger. Only justice. He stood outside the hospital one last time, the same place where he had once signed checks instead of asking questions. Now he was signing something else. A legal order. Demanding a full investigation into the medical network that had profited from his son's pain. The men in suits tried to reason with him, to soften their lies with apologies, to make deals in hushed conference rooms. But Lucas's voice was no longer the voice of a billionaire conducting business. It was the voice of a father. And fathers protect their young. "You silenced my boy for profit," he said quietly, his voice more dangerous in its softness than any rage could ever be. "Now I'm going to make sure the world hears the truth. Every document, every coded conversation, every invoice you created to keep him sick. The public will know. The legal system will know. And you will answer for it." Dr. Richardson and his colleagues tried to hide. They tried to run. They tried to protect their reputations with lawyers and settlements and silence money. But Lucas wasn't interested in quiet transactions anymore. He wanted transformation. He wanted accountability. He wanted the system to change so that no other father would ever have to discover that the people he trusted had been stealing his son's future. Oliver sat nearby, drawing on a notepad, his laughter echoing softly through the hallway outside the hospital. Awkward, uneven, but full of life. Every sound he made felt like a small rebellion against the years of silence. Every word he spoke was a victory. Every laugh was a declaration: "I am here. I am alive. I am heard." His voice was still developing. His hearing was still new. But his spirit was finally, completely, brilliantly awake. And somewhere in the distance, Leia walked her bare feet, leaving prints on the wet pavement as she prepared to disappear back into the world that had forgotten her. She didn't stay for the headlines. She didn't attend the court proceedings. She didn't wait for the thank yous or the rewards that Lucas tried to offer. Because for Leia, the reward had already been given: the knowledge that she had changed a life. That she had seen a boy when everyone else was blind. Lucas found her before she disappeared completely. On a street corner, selling her trinkets, existing in the margins of a society that didn't see her. He turned his voice low but certain. "You gave me back my son," he said simply. Leia looked at him, her eyes steady. "How do I thank you?" Lucas asked. "How do I repay something so profound?" Leia smiled faintly, that same knowing smile that had changed everything. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Grant. Just promise me you'll keep listening to him. And to the people no one else hears. Promise me you won't go back to sleep." Then she turned and walked away, her shadow stretching across the morning light. And as the sun rose, Lucas finally understood something that his billions had never taught him. Wealth could build towers, but compassion built bridges. Power could move mountains, but love moved hearts. He had spent his life chasing power, only to learn that the most powerful thing he could ever do was listen. Not with his ears, but with his heart. He began to use his resources differently. He funded clinics for the poor. He investigated medical corruption. He gave voice to the voiceless. Because a barefoot girl had shown him that sometimes, the richest experiences in life have nothing to do with money. They have everything to do with seeing another human being and actually, genuinely caring. If this story changed how you think about what matters, if you're ready to wake up to what's right in front of you, comment, "Awake" right now. Share this with someone who needs to understand that compassion is worth more than gold. And subscribe because there are more stories coming. Sometimes we think hearing means using our ears. But real listening begins with the heart. When we choose to see beyond money, beyond titles, beyond pride, that's when we rediscover our humanity. That's when we understand that the most important connections don't require wealth. They require presence. They require genuine care. A single act of empathy can awaken truth, can heal wounds, can even give someone back their voice. So I want to ask you, what have you been blind to? What have you been deaf to? What matters that you've been ignoring while you were too focused on building your empire, climbing your ladder, achieving your goals? Is there someone in your life who's been waiting for you to actually see them? To actually listen? Lucas Grant spent 8 years throwing money at a problem when all his son needed was his presence. All Oliver needed was a father who would actually see him. And it took a barefoot stranger to teach a billionaire what love really meant. So here's what I know. You don't need to be rich to change someone's life. You don't need to be powerful. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to care enough to look, to listen, to be present. Because sometimes the greatest miracles aren't pulled out of ears by street vendors. Sometimes they're created in the moment when someone finally sees you. When someone finally hears you. When someone finally says, "I see you. I hear you. You matter." If this story touched you, if it reminded you of something you've been forgetting, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, like this video. Show the algorithm that real stories matter. That stories about transformation, about justice, about love, those are the stories people want to see. Second, comment below. Tell me, what would you have done if you were Lucas? Would you forgive or would you fight? Or would you do both? Your answer might inspire someone else watching. Your story might be the wake-up call someone needs. Third, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because we're going to keep bringing you stories like this. Stories that remind you that sometimes the richest people are the ones who finally learn how to listen. Lucas Grant learned it from a barefoot girl. She taught him that wealth without wisdom is just noise. That power without compassion is just control. That a billionaire and a street vendor can teach each other what it really means to be human. So listen, not with your ears, with your heart. See the people around you. Really see them. Because one act of genuine compassion can change a life forever. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being part of this community that believes real stories matter. I'll see you in the next video.